$20. I'm asking a measly $20. She can cook, she can clean, and she barely eats a thing. Wait, wrong story. This one is even darker. Josephine watched her home disappear through a dirty train window. Beside her, her 19-year-old sister Jane whispered, "Nobody even knows where we are." 3 rows ahead sat their captor, a man who called himself their uncle. He had papers, he had legal authority, and he was taking them to Chicago, where 2 wealthy orphan sisters could be made to sign away everything their father built. What they didn't know: a cowboy named Clayton Zachary was already waiting at a bend in the tracks, his rifle ready and his father's pocket watch marking the minutes until that train arrived. He wasn't a train robber. He was just a man who owed a debt to a dead friend, and he was about to risk everything to stop a kidnapping in progress. But saving them from the train was only the beginning. Because the men who wanted those sisters, they weren't going to stop until someone was dead. The lesson: sometimes the person who saves you isn't looking for a reward. They're just someone who refuses to look away when the world says it's not their problem. And sometimes the love that lasts forever is forged in fire, not in ballrooms. If this story captured you, drop a comment and tell me, do you believe in love at first rescue? Share with someone who loves a good adventure romance, and subscribe so you never miss a story about cowboys who become heroes and the women brave enough to love them. Josephine, the older sister at 22, watched her home fade away through a dirty window. She whispered to 19-year-old Jane, "We'll get out of this, I swear it." 3 rows ahead, their captor, a man named Hoffman, sat watching them like a hawk. "But how, Josie?" Jane whispered back, her voice trembling. "Nobody even knows where we are." What they didn't know was that help was already on its way. A few miles up the track, a cowboy named Clayton Zachary was sitting on his horse Storm watching the trail. The setting sun glinted off his Winchester rifle as he checked his daddy's old pocket watch. "Right on time," he mumbled to his horse. Clayton wasn't a train robber, he was a cattleman, but a desperate telegram from his friend, Sheriff Harper, had put him on this path. The message was short. "Reeves sisters taken. Northbound train. Stop them." Clayton knew the Reeves family. Their father had been a good man. He had heard whispers about some long-lost relatives trying to get their hands on the family fortune after the old man passed. Now those rumors felt mighty real. Clayton led his horse down to a sharp bend in the tracks where he had spent the morning building a roadblock. It wasn't enough to wreck the train, but it would sure make it stop. As the locomotive's whistle echoed through the hills, Clayton settled in behind some big rocks, rifle in hand. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he knew that sometimes a little firepower made folks more agreeable. Inside the passenger car, Josephine heard the brakes screech. "We're stopping," she said to Jane. "This isn't a station." Mr. Hoffman jumped to his feet, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Stay put," he snarled at the sisters, then headed toward the front of the car. The train jolted to a halt. Through the window, Josephine saw the conductor looking at something on the tracks. This was it. This was their chance. "Jane," she whispered, "if anything happens, we run. You hear me? We run, and we don't look back." Outside, Clayton walked calmly toward the train crew. "Afternoon, fellas," he said, his rifle held easy but where everyone could see it. "Looks like you got some trouble here." The conductor shot him a dirty look. "Did you do this? This is a federal crime." "I'm afraid so," Clayton said smoothly. "I'm looking for 2 young ladies, the Reeves sisters." A big fella stepped up, looking tough. "This train is on a schedule. We ain't got time for—" Clayton's rifle cracked, kicking up dirt right between the man's boots. "The next one won't be for show," Clayton said, his voice steady as a rock. "Now, I don't want to hurt anyone. I'm just here for the girls." The gunshot sent the passengers inside into a panic. Hoffman cursed and ran to a window. That was the opening Josephine needed. "Now!" she yelled to Jane. She slammed her shoulder into Hoffman's back, sending him flying. The 2 sisters bolted for the back door of the car. "Stop them!" Hoffman screamed, scrambling for his pistol. Clayton heard the yelling just as the back door flew open. Two young women with their hands tied stumbled out onto the platform. He knew right away it was them. "Josephine! Jane!" he called out. Josephine looked up, her eyes wide with shock. "Mr. Zachary?" Just then, Hoffman appeared in the doorway, raising his pistol. Clayton didn't hesitate. He fired a single shot that hit the man's arm, making him drop the gun. "This way!" Clayton yelled, backing toward his horse. "Hurry!" Josephine grabbed Jane, and they ran across the rocky ground. Behind them, more of Hoffman's men started shouting. Clayton was already untying a second horse he had brought along. "Get on, both of you," he ordered, helping them onto the mare's back before quickly cutting their hands free with his knife. Gunshots erupted from the train, with bullets zipping right past them. "Hold on tight and follow me," Clayton shouted to Josephine as he jumped onto Storm. "Stay low!" He spurred his horse toward the cover of the thick woods. Josephine gripped the reins, with Jane holding on tight behind her. The shooting faded as they disappeared into the pines. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Clayton finally slowed them to a stop by a quiet stream. He looked at them, his face full of concern. "Y'all all right? You hurt?" Josephine shook her head. "No, just scared. How did you find us?" "Sheriff Harper sent a wire," Clayton explained, taking off his hat. "Said you'd been taken by men claiming to be family." Jane finally spoke up, her voice shaky. "Mr. Hoffman said he was our uncle from Chicago, our new guardian. He had papers and everything, but it felt wrong. He wouldn't let us talk to anyone." Josephine's jaw tightened. "He's no uncle of ours. Our father didn't have any brothers." This was the crucial piece of the puzzle. Hoffman was a fraud. "That's what the sheriff figured," Clayton said. "Your father's estate is worth a lot of money, I reckon." Josephine nodded. "He built a business from the ground up." "And now you're the heirs," Clayton finished for her. "That makes you a target." He started gathering wood for a fire as the sun went down. "We can't go back home just yet," he said. "Hoffman's men will be looking for you. I know a place we can lie low. A friend of mine, Matthew Collins, has a ranch a couple days from here. It's safe. We can go there and figure out our next move." As the fire crackled to life, it cast a warm glow on the three of them, a small circle of hope in the big dark woods. The fire cast long shadows on their tired faces. Jane was fast asleep, but Josephine sat watching the flames. "Thank you," she said softly. "I reckon we would be lost without you." Clayton just nodded, his eyes reflecting the light. "Get some rest, Miss Reeves. Tomorrow will be a long day." She studied the quiet cowboy who had risked everything for them. There was more to Clayton Zachary than he let on. By dawn, he was already up watching their back trail. He handed them dried beef and water as they stirred. "We need to move," he announced. "Hoffman will have sent word ahead. Search parties will be forming." Josephine helped her pale sister to her feet. "Jane is not used to this. Is there a town close by?" Clayton shook his head. "Too dangerous. But we will take it easy today and stay hidden." He looked at Jane with concern. "Can you make it, Miss Reeves?" Jane squared her shoulders. "I will be fine, Mr. Zachary. I will not be a burden." Soon they were riding again, with Clayton leading them through creek beds to hide their trail. To distract her sister, Josephine started asking questions. "How do you know Sheriff Harper?" she called out. A small smile touched Clayton's lips. "We were in the war together. I was just a kid who had lied about his age. Harper took me under his wing, taught me how to handle myself." His face clouded over. "Afterward, we went our own ways. But we kept in touch. He knows I can handle trouble." Jane spoke up then. "And what brought you to Oregon?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was in Wyoming until about a year ago. I ran into some trouble. I needed a new start." The way he said it shut the door on more questions. Josephine understood. Out here, most folks had a past they did not talk about. By noon, the thick forests had given way to rolling hills. Clayton found a spring in a hollow and spread out a map. "We are right here," he said, his finger on a spot about 30 miles from the rails. "The Collins Ranch is another day and a half's ride. What happens when we are safe?" Clayton folded the map. Sheriff Harper will look into Hoffman. We will figure out how to get your inheritance back. And you? Josephine asked, looking him straight in the eye. Why are you doing all this? He took a moment before answering. Your father was a good man. He gave me a job when I had nothing. I always pay my debts. Josephine felt there was more to it, but before she could ask, Clayton went rigid. Get down, he ordered, his voice low as his hand went to his rifle. Riders are coming. The sisters dove into the brush while Clayton hid the horses and found a spot behind some rocks, his rifle ready. Soon, 5 riders came into view, and she recognized Hoffman's bulky frame right away. They were following the creek, looking for any sign. Clayton slipped back to where the sisters were hiding. Hoffman and 4 others, he whispered. They have not found our trail yet. Jane gripped her sister's hand, her face white with fear. What do we do? Clayton's expression was grim. We wait. If they pass, we head for the high country to throw them off. If not, he patted his rifle. We fight. For a long hour, they stayed perfectly still while the men searched. One tracker got dangerously close to the spring. Josephine held her breath until her lungs burned. At last, after a heated argument, Hoffman's group moved on. They rode north, away from their real path. Clayton waited until they were specks in the distance. They made a mistake, he said, the relief clear in his voice. They think we are making a run for Oregon City. That buys us some time. They got on their horses and rode hard, heading east into rougher country. The sun was relentless. By sundown, Jane was nearly falling out of her saddle. Clayton found a rock overhang for shelter where a small fire would not be seen. He built a tiny smokeless fire. After a small meal of jerky, Jane was asleep in an instant. Josephine sat watching Clayton clean his rifle. He moved like he had done it 1,000 times. You have been in this kind of trouble before, she said. A man learns to be ready out here, he replied without looking up. What happened in Wyoming, she pressed. Mr. Zachary, we are trusting you with our lives. I feel I ought to know who you are. He stopped his work and finally looked at her. I was foreman on a big ranch, he began. The owner's daughter and I became close. Her father found out and accused me of stealing. It was a lie, but his word was law on that land. His jaw was set hard. So you left? She asked gently. I had to. Elizabeth wanted to come, but I could not let her ruin her life. I have been on the move ever since. I came to Oregon hoping for a fresh start. Now she understood why he was so willing to help. You are a good man, Clayton Zachary. He looked up, a little surprised she had used his first name. Then a real smile finally broke across his face. Get some rest, Josephine, he said softly. Tomorrow is another long one. As she lay down, she watched him by the firelight. In the middle of all this danger, she felt a bond forming between them. That thought kept her warm as she fell asleep. The next day was hot and clear. They rode through the high country before starting down into a wide valley. Jane was feeling stronger, and Clayton kept a steady pace. In the afternoon, they topped a rise and saw the valley spread out below them. In the distance was the Collins Ranch. There it is, Clayton said, pointing. About a 3-hour ride. Josephine looked at the big ranch with its main house and barns. It looks so peaceful, Jane said. Matthew runs a good place, Clayton agreed. He is a private man who does not pry. His wife, Sarah, will take good care of you. But as they got closer, 2 riders with rifles appeared from the trees. Clayton raised a hand. It is Clayton Zachary, he shouted. I am here to see Matthew. The men lowered their rifles a bit, but stayed watchful as they rode with them to the main house. A man with salt and pepper hair and a trim beard met them on the porch. His sharp eyes sized up the whole situation in a heartbeat. He spoke with a Texas drawl, saying, Clayton, I was not expecting you to bring company. Clayton swung down from his horse. Matthew, I apologize for showing up like this. These ladies need a safe place for a spell. This is Josephine and Jane Reeves." Matthew Collins gave Clayton a firm handshake and tipped his head to the sisters. "Any friend of Clayton's is a friend of mine. Y'all come on inside. My wife will get you settled." Inside, the ranch house felt like a true home. His wife, Sarah, a warm woman in her 40s, took one look at the sisters and led them to a guest room. "You poor dears look worn to a frazzle," she said with kindness. "I am fixing to get some hot food on the table, but you wash up and rest first." Once they were alone, Jane looked at her sister with relief. "Do you reckon we are safe here?" she asked. Josephine nodded, trying to brush the knots from her hair. "Clayton trusts these folks, and I trust him." She stopped for a moment. "He put everything on the line to help us, Jane. Not many men would do that." Jane gave her a knowing glance. "You sure do admire him." Josephine felt her face grow warm. "I do. He is not like the other men we know. He has a real sense of honor. And he is handsome," Jane added, a small smile appearing on her face. "That is not important right now," Josephine replied. Jane's smile just got bigger. "If you say so, sister." Down in the study, Clayton laid out the whole story for Matthew, who listened without a word. "So Hoffman wants their family land," Matthew said when he finished. "And you figure he was sending them north to Chicago?" Clayton nodded, his face grim. "That is my guess. Up there, they would be all alone. He could make them sign anything." Matthew rubbed his beard, deep in thought. "Are you certain Sheriff Harper's looking into this?" "I sent a boy with a message when we stopped for water at Deer Creek," Clayton confirmed. "The sisters have to stay put until we figure out who is pulling the strings." "They can stay as long as they need," Matthew promised. "But what about you, Clayton? This is not your fight." "It became my fight the second I took them off that train," Clayton said, his voice hard as iron. Matthew looked at his friend and nodded. "Well, you are welcome here too. An extra gun never hurts." After a good meal, the sisters felt almost human again. They were clean and wearing clothes Sarah had lent them. Matthew shared some news as his wife poured coffee. "I sent a man to town to telegraph the sheriff and get supplies. He should be back tomorrow evening." "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Collins," Josephine said. "We are so grateful." Sarah smiled at her. "It is our pleasure, dear. This old house can get mighty quiet. Our children are all grown and have families of their own." Jane, looking more at ease, asked, "How long have you owned this ranch?" 15 years, Matthew said. "I came here after my time as a ranger was done. I wanted to build something that would last." He glanced over at his wife with a soft expression. "And it has been a good life," Sarah added with a warm smile. The easy conversation made the knot in Josephine's stomach finally loosen. She found her eyes drifting over to Clayton. He was quiet, mostly listening. In the soft light of the lamp, she noticed a faint scar on his jaw. She saw how the corner of his mouth turned up when he was amused. As the evening ended, Josephine caught Clayton looking at her. Their eyes met for just a moment before he gave a small nod. It was a silent message that made her heart skip a beat. The next morning felt wonderfully normal. Sarah gave the sisters small chores to do, which they welcomed. Josephine, feeling restless, asked if she could take a walk outside. "Of course, dear," Sarah told her. "Just stay where we can see the house. It is best to be careful." The clean morning air felt good. Josephine heard a horse snort and a man's gentle voice coming from the corral. She walked over and saw Clayton working with a handsome young stallion. He moved around the horse with a quiet confidence, holding out an apple in his hand. Josephine leaned on the fence, watching as the horse slowly calmed down and took the apple from his palm. It was like they were speaking a language without words, one built on simple trust. "He is a beautiful horse," she said softly. Clayton looked over at her, not surprised. "He is. Matthew is raising some fine animals here. You have a gift with him," she noted. Clayton gave the horse one last pat and walked out of the corral. "I have been around them since I was a boy. My father taught me that patience works a whole lot better than force." "That is a good lesson," Josephine said, walking beside him toward the barn. It probably works for more than just horses. Clayton gave a small smile. Yes, I suppose it does. Inside the barn, they sat on hay bales in a comfortable silence. Tell me about your home, Clayton said after a moment. What was it like before all this happened? Josephine thought for a second. It was comfortable, she said, but we were never idle. It had been 5 years since my mother passed, leaving me to help Father with the business while Jane took care of the house. He always said a woman ought to know her way around a ledger. I can read accounts just as good as any man, and I can strike a deal on timber without getting swindled. Clayton just nodded like he already knew. That explains why they want you under their thumb instead of 6 feet under. You know too much about the business. Josephine's face hardened. Yes, Jane and I are the only ones who know everything Father owned. If we just disappeared, his business partners would ask too many questions. But if you signed your inheritance over to a guardian, Clayton finished her thought. Exactly. She clenched her fists. What I cannot figure out is who is pulling the strings. Hoffman is just a puppet. Father had rivals, but none, I'd reckon, would go this far. Money does strange things to people, Clayton said quietly. It can sure bring out the ugly in a person. And the good, Josephine shot back, looking him straight in the eye. You could have just ignored Sheriff Harper's telegram. The reward money is not worth the trouble you are in. Clayton held her gaze. Some things are not about the money, Josephine. The air between them got thick and quiet. She felt the warmth from his arm so close to hers on the hay and saw that his eyes were as blue as a Texas sky. Just then, the sound of a horse galloping hard broke the spell. Clayton was on his feet in a flash, his hand on his pistol. When they got out of the barn, they saw one of Matthew's ranch hands riding in from town, way too early. By the time they reached the porch, Matthew was already listening to the man's urgent news. His face was grim when he turned to the others. Hoffman and his crew were seen in Riverton, asking about strangers. They are heading this way. Clayton's jaw set hard. How many of them? The ranch hand, still trying to catch his breath, said, 8 now. They look like hired guns and have been throwing money around. Matthew looked at his wife. Sarah, get the ladies ready to leave. Clayton, I need you in my office. While Sarah rushed the sisters inside to pack, Clayton followed Matthew into his study. His mind was turning, looking for a way out. They will be here by nightfall if they ride hard, Matthew said, spreading a map on his desk. We could try to outrun them, but it is risky with the women. Clayton looked at the map. A firefight is not an option. We are outnumbered, and I will not put the sisters in that kind of danger. Matthew agreed. He pointed to a spot high in the foothills. There is my old hunting cabin. It is hidden and stocked with food, but the ride up there is rough. Can they handle it? Clayton wondered. There is another way, Matthew said, rolling up the map. The supply wagon heads to the Eagle Peak mining camp in the morning. We can hide them inside it, underneath the cargo. Nobody would ever think to look for them there. From the camp, they can catch a stagecoach to Fort Collins. Clayton thought it over. That might just work. I would ride along with them. Of course, Matthew said with a look that Clayton decided to ignore. In less than an hour, they were getting everything ready. The wagon was moved to the barn out of sight. Matthew's most trusted man, an old hand named Davis, was told the plan. They shifted the mining supplies to make a small hidden space where the sisters could ride. Josephine and Jane, now in practical clothes from Sarah, listened as Clayton explained. It is not going to be a comfortable ride, he told them. The road is rough and you have to stay hidden until Davis says it is safe. Jane looked scared, but Josephine gave a firm nod. We will be fine. But what about you? I will follow the wagon on horseback, but I will stay out of sight, Clayton said. If trouble comes, I will be nearby. Sarah packed them food, water, and blankets, all while talking cheerfully to help calm Jane's nerves. The younger sister was clearly rattled, but held herself together. As the sun started to set, the whole ranch grew tense. Matthew set his men up in key spots to slow down Hoffman's group when they arrived. The plan was simple. Pretend they knew nothing and give the wagon a good head start. In the barn, Davis was making the final checks. He would leave at first light using a back trail. Clayton had the sisters practice getting into and out of their hiding spot. During a quiet moment, Josephine grabbed Clayton's arm. What if they do not believe Matthew? What if they hurt him or Sarah? Clayton looked grim. Matthew knows how to handle himself. Hoffman is not stupid enough to start a fight with a respected rancher unless he is sure you are here. It feels like we are bringing danger to everyone we meet, Josephine said, her voice full of worry. Clayton's hand gently covered hers on his arm. This is not your fault, Josephine. Do not ever think that. Their eyes locked for a moment, and a silent understanding passed between them. He let go and stepped back. Try to get some sleep. You are going to need it tomorrow. Late that night, Hoffman and his men rode in, just as Matthew had figured. The dogs started barking, and the ranch hands called out warnings. Through their window, the sisters saw Matthew meet them in the yard. He looked calm, but his men were all around with rifles ready. The sisters could not hear what was said, but they could see it all. Matthew was polite but firm, shaking his head. Hoffman got more and more angry, waving his arms. After a long, tense standoff, Hoffman's crew finally left without a fight. But they made camp just in sight of the ranch, sending a clear signal they were not leaving. They will be watching, Clayton told the sisters later. But the supply wagon leaves every week, so it will not look strange. At dawn, the ranch was buzzing with activity. In the middle of all the commotion, Davis hitched his team to the wagon like it was any other day. Clayton helped the sisters into their hiding spot, with the barn blocking the view from Hoffman's camp. Stay completely quiet, he whispered as he covered them with crates. Do not make a sound unless I or Davis give the signal. Josephine nodded and squeezed her sister's hand. Be careful, Clayton. His face softened for just a second. Always am. And then he was gone. They lay in the dark, cramped space as the wagon started to roll and sway. Through tiny cracks, they saw the ranch disappear behind them. For more than an hour, they rode in silence, listening to the wagon creak and the horses' hooves. Josephine tried to keep track of where they were going. Then, without warning, Davis yelled, "Whoa there!" and the wagon jolted to a stop. The sisters froze, listening. They heard men's voices, but it was not Clayton. "Morning, old man," a rough voice called out. "Where are you off to with all this?" "Headed to the Eagle Peak mining camp," Davis answered, his voice calm and steady. "Same trip I make every week." "Who is asking?" "Just passing by," the man said, dodging the question. "You mind if we have a look at your cargo? We have heard about some stealing around here." Josephine's heart pounded against her ribs, and Jane's grip felt like it would break her hand. "Help yourself," Davis said, sounding like he did not have a care in the world. "But I do not know what anyone would want with a bunch of beans and tools." Heavy boots stomped closer. Through a crack, Josephine saw a bearded man walking around the wagon, looking everything over. Another man stood by the horses, his hand resting on his gun. The first man then climbed right up onto the wagon bed. His boots landed just inches from where Josephine was hiding. He rummaged through the wagon, prodding barrels and lifting a tarp. After a few tense moments, Davis asked, "Satisfied?" The man grunted as he hopped off the wagon. "Looks clear," he said. "Haven't seen any women traveling alone, have you? 2 sisters might be in some trouble." Davis let out a convincing laugh. "Haven't seen a woman in 3 weeks, except for old Mrs. Collins. That's the mining life for you." The men talked for another minute, and then the sound of horses faded as they rode off. Davis waited a good while before speaking low. "Stay put, ladies. Those were Hoffman's men. They might just circle back." The journey started again, but now everything felt more dangerous. Where was Clayton? Did he see what happened? By midday, the road grew steep and rough. Every jolt of the wagon tested the sisters' endurance. The summer heat turned their hiding spot into an oven. Finally, Davis called back to them. "Coast is clear for now. You can sit up and stretch, but keep your heads down." Josephine and Jane gratefully came out from under the canvas, staying low. The fresh air was a sweet relief. "Where is Mr. Zachary?" Jane asked, putting a voice to Josephine's own worry. Davis kept his eyes on the trail. "He's shadowing us, don't you worry none. He likely saw those men and is making sure they're gone for good." Just as he said it, Clayton appeared from the trees, riding alongside them. "Two more of Hoffman's crew up ahead," he said, his voice tight. Davis nodded, his face grim. "Can we get around them?" "There's an old logging track about a half-mile up," Clayton replied. "It's rough, but it'll bypass them and should still get us to Eagle Peak by sundown." That new path was even worse than the main trail. The wagon groaned and creaked as Davis navigated the deep ruts. Josephine and Jane went back into hiding, and the rough ride made their cramped space almost unbearable. Every jarring bump pulled a quiet groan from the sisters. Late in the afternoon, just as the sun was dipping low, disaster struck. A deep rut caught the right wheel, and with a loud crack it splintered. The wagon lurched hard to one side, sending cargo sliding right toward the sisters. Clayton was off his horse in a flash, helping Davis get the panicked team under control. They stopped the wagon from tipping over, but the wheel was busted beyond a quick fix. "Are you all right?" Clayton called out, helping the sisters climb out from the mess. Josephine nodded, brushing wood splinters from her skirt. "Just shaken," she said. Jane looked pale but wasn't hurt. "What do we do now?" she asked. Davis was already looking at the broken wheel, his face serious. "Can't fix this here. We're about 6 miles from Eagle Peak, and that's a long walk with Hoffman's men around." Clayton scanned the dense forest around them. "We'll have to split up," he decided. "Davis, you unhitch one of the horses and ride for help. Bring back some men and tools. The sisters and I will go on foot and stick to the trees." Davis looked worried. "That leaves y'all mighty exposed, Clayton." "We'll be fine," Clayton said, sounding more certain than he probably felt. They quickly gathered supplies, water, food, and Clayton's rifle. Davis rode off on the stronger horse, promising to be back as fast as he could. "Follow this logging track," he advised before he left. "It runs along the creek most of the way to town." As Davis disappeared, Josephine felt a fresh wave of fear. She looked at Clayton, who was calmly checking his rifle, and felt a little better. "We should get moving," he said, glancing at the long shadows. "We've got maybe 3 hours of daylight left." The trail was difficult. Clayton led the way, quiet and alert. Jane was clearly struggling, so Josephine stayed right by her side, offering a hand when needed. They had gone about 2 miles when Clayton suddenly held up his hand, signaling them to stop. He listened for a moment, then waved them off the path into the thick brush. "Someone's coming," he whispered as they hid behind a big fallen log. "Riders." A few minutes later, 3 men on horseback came into view. Josephine's heart sank when she recognized Hoffman leading them. They had found the broken-down wagon and were on their trail. Clayton's jaw tightened. He reached for his rifle but didn't raise it, not with the sisters right there. "There's a creek past those pines," he whispered, pointing. "If we can get to it, the water will hide our tracks." They moved low and slow, using every tree for cover. Josephine was sure the pounding of her heart was loud enough for the men to hear. They were almost to the trees when Jane's foot caught on a root, and she went down with a small cry. The sound was quiet, but it was enough. "There!" one of the riders yelled. "Run!" Clayton shouted, pushing them forward. "To the creek!" They crashed through the undergrowth, branches slapping their faces. The shouts and pounding hooves of the horses were right behind them. The creek was just ahead. Clayton got there first and turned to help them down the bank. "Go upstream," he ordered, his rifle now ready. "I'll hold them off." "Clayton, no!" Josephine cried, even as she pulled Jane into the cold water. His eyes met hers, full of determination. "Go! I'll find you. Head for that big dead pine tree on the ridge." A gunshot cracked through the air, hitting a tree right next to Clayton's head. He fired back, making the men duck for cover. Josephine gave him one last desperate look, then pulled her sister up the creek. The cold water numbed their legs, and the sound of gunfire echoed behind them. For what felt like an eternity, the sisters fought their way through the water. Eventually, the sounds of the fight faded. "We need to find that pine tree," Josephine told Jane, helping her up the steep bank as darkness fell. They were exhausted and soaking wet, but they climbed the ridge until they saw the massive dead pine silhouetted against the sky. They collapsed at the base of the huge tree, shivering from the cold and the fear. Josephine put an arm around her sister. "He'll come," she whispered, trying to believe her own words. Clayton will find us. As the moon rose, they waited in the quiet woods, listening. The forest was filled with the sounds of the night. Then they heard a twig snap nearby, a deliberate sound. Josephine tensed, holding her sister tighter. "Josephine, Jane," a low voice called from the shadows. It was Clayton. "Here," Josephine answered, her voice filled with relief. He stepped out of the darkness, limping just a little but otherwise okay. "Thank God," he said, kneeling beside them. "Are you hurt?" "Just cold and worn out," Josephine said, trying to read his face in the gloom. "What happened? We heard gunfire." Clayton dropped his rifle and wrapped his heavy coat around Jane. "Hoffman and another man kept after y'all. The third stayed for me." His face grew hard. "He won't be going back." Josephine felt no judgment, only relief that Clayton was alive. "And Hoffman?" she asked. "I lost them down at the creek," he answered. "But they are still hunting for us. We have to move." The sisters got to their feet, exhausted but determined. Clayton led them along the ridge, using the trees for cover. "There is an old trapper's cabin about a mile from here," he said. "It should be empty and will give us a roof for the night." The cabin was a simple one-room shelter with a stone fireplace, but it was enough to block the wind. Clayton checked for supplies. "No food," he announced, "but we have dry wood and some old blankets. It is better than the cold ground." As he got a small fire going, Josephine helped Jane out of her wet clothes and into a musty blanket. Her sister was asleep in an instant. Josephine changed next, with Clayton keeping his back turned to the room. He stared into the flames until she was wrapped in her own blanket. "You need to get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow is going to be another long day." Josephine edged closer to the growing warmth of the fire. "What about you?" "I will stand watch," he replied, checking his pistol. "Hoffman is not the type to give up." In the firelight, she saw the weariness in his eyes and the tension in his frame. This man had risked his life for them. The weight of that fact settled deep inside her. "Clayton," she said, waiting for him to look at her. "Saying thank you does not feel like enough." A warmth that was not from the fire appeared in his eyes. "It is enough," he said, his voice thick with unspoken feeling. Josephine reached out and took his hand. His skin was calloused and warm. After a moment, his fingers gently closed around hers. They sat together in a comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. Finally, the need for sleep was too much, and she moved to the other bunk. As she drifted off, she was aware of Clayton's steady presence by the door, a guardian watching over them in the night. Morning arrived all too quickly with gray light peeking through the single window. Josephine woke to find Jane still asleep and Clayton dozing in a chair by the door, rifle in hand. He was instantly awake the moment she moved. "Any trouble?" she whispered. Clayton shook his head. "All quiet. But we need to get moving. Davis might have help on the way from Eagle Peak." A thought struck her. "The stagecoach to Fort Collins. When does it leave?" "Runs every day at noon," Clayton replied, understanding her immediately. If they could get to town, they could be on that coach. The idea of safety was powerful, but she felt a strange hesitation at the thought of leaving Clayton. Jane began to stir, and practical needs took over. They ate the last of Clayton's jerky and hardtack, washing it down with spring water. Their clothes were still damp but wearable. As they got ready, Clayton laid out the plan. "We will follow this ridge for about 3 miles, then head down to the main trail. With any luck, we will run into Davis's rescue party." The journey that morning was slow and careful. Clayton's eyes were always scanning the trees for any sign of their pursuers. The sisters walked with a new sense of purpose, driven by the hope of reaching town. By mid-morning, they reached the spot where they would leave the ridge. Clayton held up a hand, stopping them as he looked down at the trail below. "Something is wrong," he muttered. Josephine came up beside him. "What is it?" He pointed toward the road. "It is empty. Eagle Peak is a busy camp. There should be wagons and riders." Just then, a single gunshot echoed from the direction of the town, followed by a few more. "Get down!" Clayton ordered, pulling them behind some rocks. More shots rang out, and they heard a distant yell on the wind. Clayton's face was grim. "I think Hoffman's men made it to town," he said quietly. "They are likely looking for you two and not asking nicely." Jane went pale. "Those poor people. This is our fault." "No," Clayton said, his voice firm. "This is on Hoffman. Y'all are his victims, not the cause." Josephine's fear turned to resolve. "What do we do? We cannot go into Eagle Peak now." Clayton weighed their options. "There is another mining town, Silver Creek, about 20 miles west. It is a hard trip, but it might be our only chance now." 20 miles, Jane whispered, her voice full of doubt. Josephine squeezed her sister's hand. "We can do it, Jane." Clayton nodded, approving of Josephine's spirit. "We will need supplies. There is a homestead down in the valley. If the folks there are friendly, they might help us." With a new plan, they started down the steep ridge, moving carefully so they would not send rocks tumbling down. The shooting from Eagle Peak had stopped, which made Clayton even more uneasy. "They either found who they were looking for or they are spreading out," he explained. By the afternoon, they reached the valley and made their way toward the homestead. It was a small cabin with a barn and a garden. Smoke drifted from the chimney. "Wait here," Clayton told the sisters, leaving them hidden in the trees as he walked toward the house. Clayton approached the farmhouse by himself. A bearded, middle-aged man came out onto the porch, holding a shotgun in a way that was ready, but not yet threatening. After Clayton explained their trouble, the farmer relaxed and waved for the sisters to come forward. A woman, his wife, joined him on the porch, her face a mix of worry and curiosity. Clayton made the introductions. "This is Mr. and Mrs. Parker. They've offered to help us." The Parkers were more than willing. They were eager to help once they heard the sisters' story. Mrs. Parker, a motherly woman with kind eyes, started making food right away. Her husband offered Clayton extra shells for his rifle and drew him a map to a town called Silver Creek. Mr. Parker told them, "There's been trouble up at Eagle Peak for a few days now. Strangers are asking questions and throwing money around." Clayton asked, "Have you heard anything from the Collins Ranch?" The farmer shook his head. "The road's been quiet except for those fellas. Matthew Collins mostly keeps to himself, and so do we." After they ate, Mrs. Parker packed them food for the road, including bread, cheese, and jerky. She also gave the sisters some of her own clean clothes, even though the fit wasn't quite right. Mr. Parker pointed to the map he had drawn. "The trail to Silver Creek is clear until you hit Elk Canyon. From there, you just have to follow the creek north. The town is in a valley, so you cannot miss it." Clayton studied the map, memorizing the route. "How long will it take?" he asked. 2 days if you keep a steady pace," Parker answered. "You could stay the night," Mrs. Parker offered kindly. "The young ladies look worn out." Josephine was grateful, but she knew they had to keep moving. "It is not safe for you if we stay. Hoffman's men could be searching everywhere." Clayton agreed with her. "She is right. The less folks know about us, the better." As they got ready to leave, Mr. Parker led a sturdy brown horse from the barn. "Take Penny," he said, handing the reins to Clayton. "The ladies can ride together. You can bring her back when this is all over." Josephine was touched by his kindness and started to protest, but the farmer just waved his hand. "Out here, neighbors help neighbors. Maybe one day you will do the same for someone else." With sincere thanks, they set off for Silver Creek. Clayton led the horse while Jane and Josephine rode with their new supplies tied on behind them. They moved quickly, hoping to get as far as they could before dark. By dusk, they reached Elk Canyon, a deep cut in the land with high rocky walls. The trail got narrow as it followed the creek into the canyon. "We will make camp up ahead," Clayton said. The spot was a small clearing, protected by tall pine trees near a calm pool in the creek. While Clayton took care of the horse, Josephine and Jane gathered wood for a fire. The simple tasks felt normal after all the chaos. Josephine found herself watching Clayton. He moved with a quiet competence that was truly impressive. He is remarkable, is not he? Jane whispered, noticing her sister's stare. Josephine felt a blush creep up her neck. He saved our lives, she said. It is more than that, Josie, Jane said with a knowing smile. I see the way you look at him. Before Josephine could answer, Clayton returned and they started talking about their plans. They needed to find the law in Silver Creek and send a telegram to Sheriff Harper. What will you do after we are safe, Clayton? Jane asked. Clayton poked the fire with a stick. My job is not finished until you are both truly safe. He looked up and met Josephine's eyes across the flames. For a moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a hint of something more than their current situation. The moment was broken by the snap of a twig in the darkness. Clayton was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand, scanning the shadows. Stay here, he whispered, and then he was gone, disappearing into the night. The minutes felt like hours while the sisters waited by the fire. Finally, he reappeared as quietly as he had left. Just a deer, he said, but he still looked alert. We should take turns on watch tonight. I will go first. Josephine found it hard to sleep. Her sister was already sound asleep beside her, but Josephine's mind was racing. She watched Clayton as he sat with his back to a tree, the rifle resting on his lap, his eyes constantly moving. She must have drifted off because the next thing she knew, Clayton was gently shaking her shoulder. Your watch, Josephine, he whispered. He handed her his pistol. Just in case. Wake me if you hear anything. As he settled down to sleep, Josephine took her place by the fire. The night was quiet except for the sound of the creek and an owl hooting in the distance. Her eyes kept going back to Clayton's sleeping form. His face looked younger and more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. She wondered what kind of life he had lived before all of this. As the sky began to lighten, Josephine woke Clayton. They broke camp quickly, wanting to get back on the trail. The second day was much harder. The path through Elk Canyon was rough and sometimes disappeared completely. Clayton had to scout ahead often, leaving the sisters with the horse. Around noon, they left the main trail to follow the creek north, just as Mr. Parker had told them. The ground became steep and they had to get off and lead the horse. We are making good time, Clayton said during a short rest. We might even reach Silver Creek by tonight. Jane, though clearly exhausted, nodded. I am ready. Josephine squeezed her sister's hand, feeling proud of her strength. They had just finished packing up their things when Clayton suddenly went stiff, reaching for his rifle. Get down, he yelled. Now! The sisters dove for the ground as gunshots exploded from the rocks above them. A bullet hit the tree right next to Josephine. The horse, Penny, reared up in terror, broke loose, and galloped away down the trail. Behind those boulders, Clayton ordered, firing back to give them cover as they scrambled for safety. Josephine could see two men on the ridge above them. It was Hoffman and one of his men. The ambush had been carefully planned. They have the high ground, Clayton said, his voice grim. We need to move, Jane cried out. The horse! All our food is gone. Clayton answered, It cannot be helped now. Stay low and keep up. They scrambled down the canyon, using every rock and tree for cover. Clayton was a natural in the rough country, always keeping himself between the sisters and the gunfire. He fired back just enough to keep Hoffman's men from getting too close. For the better part of an hour, they ran and hid, moving deeper into the canyon. Hoffman's men kept coming, staying just out of rifle range, herding them forward like cattle. They are pushing us away from Silver Creek, Clayton said when they stopped for a breath. They want to force us out into the open. Josephine's mind raced. Is there another way? Can we circle back? Clayton shook his head. Not without crossing open ground. They would have us. Jane, looking pale but holding herself together, asked the question they were all thinking. So what do we do now? I'm down to 6 rounds, Clayton said, his face grim. That was not nearly enough for a real fight. He looked at the two sisters, his mind already made up. There's only one way this works. I'll draw them off while you two make a run for Silver Creek. Make sure you stay in the creek bed. That way you will not leave any tracks. No, Josephine protested immediately. We are not leaving you to face them by yourself. Clayton's eyes locked with hers, full of fierce determination. "It is the only way, Josephine. I can outrun them in the high country. Then I will circle back to town." "It is too dangerous," she pleaded, her heart pounding with fear for him. "They will kill you." A faint smile touched his lips. "Well, they will have to catch me first," he said. "And I know these mountains a whole lot better than they do." Jane gently touched her sister's arm. "He is right, Josie. It is our best chance." The logic was solid, but Josephine's heart screamed against it. The thought of Clayton facing that monster Hoffman alone, possibly dying for them, was just too much to bear. "I cannot let you do this," she whispered. Clayton's expression softened as he reached out to touch her cheek. "I will find you in Silver Creek. I promise." He then turned to Jane. "About 2 miles downstream, the creek forks. Take the right branch. It leads straight to town. Stay in the water." Jane nodded, committing his words to memory. "We will find the sheriff the second we get there." "Good," Clayton said, checking his rifle one last time before his eyes found Josephine's again. "Go now. I'm going to make some noise to pull them away from you." Josephine knew arguing was pointless. With a heavy heart, she touched his arm. "Please be careful." His hand briefly covered hers. "Always. Now go." The sisters slipped away, moving quietly down the rocky creek bed. Behind them, they heard Clayton start firing his rifle much faster than before. Then came the sound of him crashing through the brush, leading their pursuers away from them. Hoffman's angry yell echoed through the canyon. He and his men had taken the bait, chasing Clayton instead of looking for the sisters. Josephine had to fight the overwhelming urge to look back. Jane grabbed her arm and pulled her forward, understanding her sister's turmoil but knowing they had to survive. "He knows what he is doing," Jane said, trying to reassure her as they pushed through the cold water. "We have to trust him." And Josephine realized she did. She trusted Clayton Zachary with her life, her sister's life, and maybe her heart too. That realization gave her strength. As the afternoon stretched on, they followed the creek just as he had told them. They found the fork and took the right branch. Before long, signs of civilization appeared. An old abandoned box by the water, a rough trail, and a few tree stumps. By early evening, they finally saw it. Silver Creek was a small town of wooden buildings nestled in a narrow valley. Smoke drifted up from the chimneys, and the sounds of life filled the air. The sisters approached with caution, knowing their ragged appearance would draw attention. They walked down the main street, getting curious looks from the townspeople. "The sheriff's office," Josephine murmured, spotting the building with its barred windows. "That is where we need to go." Sheriff Wilson was a no-nonsense man in his 50s who listened to their story with growing alarm. "Hoffman," he repeated, jotting notes in a book. "And you are saying this man claims to be your guardian, but he has no legal right to be?" "None whatsoever," Josephine confirmed. "Our father's will appointed a Mr. Edward Hargrove of Oregon City as our legal advisor." There was no mention of any guardian, and definitely not some unknown uncle from Chicago. The sheriff nodded. "I will send a telegraph to Oregon City at once. I know the sheriff there." He looked at the two exhausted sisters with sympathy. "In the meantime, my wife, Mrs. Wilson, will get you settled at the hotel. You will be safe here." The sheriff's wife was a kind, motherly woman who escorted them to the hotel. She arranged for a room, hot baths, and fresh clothes from her own daughters. "Your friend, the cowboy who helped you," Mrs. Wilson asked gently, "do you think he will make it to town?" Josephine's heart tightened in her chest. "He promised he would." The older woman patted her hand. "Then I am sure he will, dear. The men who survive out here always keep their promises." That night, clean and fed, Jane fell asleep almost instantly. But Josephine lay awake in the dark, holding on to his promise with all her might. Josephine couldn't find a wink of sleep, listening to the strange noises of that mining town and worrying sick about Clayton. Lord, please keep him safe, she prayed into the dark. Please let him come back. The next morning, a telegraph brought the news. Sheriff Wilson showed up at their hotel room right after they ate, looking serious but pleased. He got straight to the point. "Got a wire from Harper," he said. "Seems you ladies kicked a real hornet's nest." Harper had been digging ever since they went missing. Turns out the man calling himself Hoffman was really James Kruger, a fellow wanted in 3 states for swindling, and the law suspected him of a couple of killings, too. Josephine's breath caught in her throat. Who was he working for? "Now that's where it gets interesting," Wilson went on. "Your daddy's old business partner, a man named Victor Chambers. It seems he'd been trying to get his hands on Reeves Enterprises ever since your father passed. When the law wouldn't let him, he cooked up this whole scheme to have you declared missing so he could take over." Jane's eyes went wide. "Mr. Chambers? But he and Daddy were friends for 20 years. "Friendship can wear thin when there's money on the table," Wilson said, his voice grim. "Harper's already got Chambers locked up tight in Oregon City." Josephine felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was mixed with anger at the betrayal. Still, one worry stood taller than all the rest. "Have you heard anything about Clayton Zachary?" she asked, her voice trembling. The sheriff just shook his head. "Nothing yet, but there's a stage heading for Junction City at noon. You can catch a train from there back home. Harper's sending a man to meet you." Josephine was grateful, but her heart felt like it was being pulled in two. Leaving without knowing if Clayton was dead or alive was a terrible thought. But she had a duty to Jane and to her father's company. They had to go back. "We'll be ready," she said, her voice quiet. As they packed their few things, Josephine felt like she was walking through a heavy fog. Jane, who always saw everything, watched her with worried eyes. "He'll find us," Jane said gently. "If not here, he'll find us in Oregon City." Josephine just nodded, trying to believe her sister. "I just need to know he's all right." The morning crawled by slower than a tired snail. Sheriff Wilson had a deputy take them to the stagecoach, and his wife packed them a basket of food for the trip. Once the town heard their story, folks came by to wish them safe travels. As the driver got the horses ready, Josephine stood on the porch, searching the street one last time, praying for a miracle, for just one glimpse of Clayton. Jane stood right there beside her, a quiet comfort. "All aboard," the driver hollered. With a heavy sigh, Josephine turned to leave, but then she froze. A lone rider was coming down the far end of the street. Even from that distance, she knew that shape. It was Clayton, riding a borrowed horse straight for the center of town. "Clayton!" she cried out, grabbing her skirts and running down the steps, not caring who was watching. He swung down from the horse as she ran up, his face breaking into a wide smile of relief. "You're alive," she whispered, stopping herself just before she threw her arms around him right there in public. "A man's got to keep his promises," he answered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion, but his eyes were warm. "That fella Kruger won't be bothering you again." She understood then. "It was you." Clayton gave a single sharp nod. "It came down to him or me. I decided it'd be me." He said it with no regret, just the quiet confidence of a man who did what had to be done. "The stage is leaving," Jane called from the porch, smiling now that she saw Clayton was safe. Josephine turned back to him, facing the goodbye she dreaded. "We're going home to Oregon City. Sheriff Harper's having someone meet our train." Clayton nodded, keeping his face carefully blank. "That's good. You'll be safe now that Chambers is behind bars." "And you?" Josephine asked, her heart pounding. "Will you come to Oregon City?" For a second, something like hope flickered in his eyes. "You want me to?" "Yes," she said without a moment's hesitation. "I do." The driver shouted a final warning, his patience worn thin. Josephine knew she had to board, but leaving him felt impossible. Clayton settled it for her. He took her hand and pressed his pocket watch into her palm. "You hold on to this for me," he said softly. "I'll be along to get it." She knew it was a promise, a pledge that he would return. Josephine closed her fingers tight around the warm metal and nodded. "I'll be waiting." Their eyes met for a long moment, saying more than words ever could. Then Jane called her name again, and the moment was gone. "Go on now," Clayton said gently. "I'll find you." With that promise warming her heart, Josephine turned and hurried onto the stagecoach. As it pulled out of Silver Creek, she watched him get smaller and smaller, her hand clutching the watch in her pocket. The trip back to Oregon City was long, but they had no trouble. Just like he promised, a deputy from Sheriff Harper's office met them in Junction City and saw them safely onto the train. Seeing the familiar fields of home was a comfort after everything they'd been through. When they finally pulled into the station, Sheriff Harper himself was there on the platform. "Miss Reeves, Miss Jane," he said with a warm smile. "Welcome home. We were worried about you." The next few days were a blur of giving statements and dealing with lawyers. Victor Chambers was facing a heap of serious charges, and his confession pointed the finger at a few other folks who helped him with his dirty scheme. Josephine handled it all like a true businesswoman, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She was always thinking about Clayton, and the watch in her pocket was a constant reminder of his promise. One evening, Jane found her sitting alone in the parlor. "You're in love with him, aren't you?" Josephine didn't bother pretending. "Yes," she said simply. "I think I have been since the moment he stopped that train." Jane smiled. "Then why the long face? He'll come, Josie. A man like that doesn't do what he did for you just to ride off into the sunset." "But what if he changed his mind?" Josephine whispered, saying her biggest fear out loud. "What if he decides a woman with all my responsibilities isn't what he's looking for?" "Well, then he wouldn't be the man you think he is," Jane said plainly. "And I don't reckon that's the case." About 2 weeks after they got home, Josephine was in her father's study, which was her study now, looking over some papers. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hollister, knocked on the door. "There's a Mr. Zachary here to see you, Miss Reeves." Josephine's heart nearly jumped out of her chest. She stood up so fast she almost knocked over the inkwell. Taking a deep breath, she smoothed her dress. "Show him in, please." When Clayton walked in, she almost gasped. The trail-worn cowboy was gone. In his place was a gentleman in a fine suit with his hair cut neat and his face clean-shaven. The only thing that was the same were his eyes, that same deep blue she remembered so well. "Clayton," she said, feeling suddenly shy. "Well, look at you," he said with a small smile, taking off his hat. "I figured I ought to make a proper impression. Seems the whole town is talking about the cowboy who saved the Reeves sisters." Josephine smiled back, finally starting to relax. "Let them talk. I owe you everything, you and Jane both." Clayton walked further into the room. He glanced around her fine office, and for a second, she worried the wealth of it all might build a wall between them. "I believe this is yours," she said, breaking the quiet by holding out his pocket watch. But Clayton made no move to take it. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "I did not come for the watch, Josephine." Her breath caught in her throat. "Then why did you come?" He said it plain and simple. "For you. If you will have me." His honesty brought tears to her eyes. "But what about your life in Wyoming, the trouble you left behind?" "That is all settled," he answered. "Sheriff Harper helped clear my name. The truth finally came out, and I am a free man." A wave of hope washed over her. "And what does a free man want with a woman running a lumber mill?" Clayton smiled, taking her hands with the watch nestled between them. "He wants to build a life with her, to be her partner in all things, right here in Oregon City, if she will have him." She had to be certain. "You would trade the freedom of a cowboy for the life of a businessman?" He nodded. "I would, though I must insist on keeping my horses. A man needs to hold on to a piece of his past." A real happy laugh bubbled up from inside her. "I think that can be arranged." His expression grew serious. "I love you, Josephine Reeves. I think I have since the moment I saw you get off that train, scared but so brave for your sister. I love you too, she whispered, letting the words out of her heart at last. More than I thought was possible. He drew her closer. Folks learn a lot about each other in dangerous times. We lived a whole lifetime in just a few days. Then he kissed her, a kiss full of tenderness and promise, and she knew their bond was stronger than any proper courtship could ever create. Jane will be thrilled, she said with a smile. And what will the high society folks think, he teased. They will just have to get used to it, she replied. Besides, you are the hero who saved the Reeves sisters. 1 month later, they were married in a ceremony that was the perfect blend of her elegance and his straightforward nature. Jane, as maid of honor, cried happy tears for her sister. Sheriff Harper stood beside Clayton as his best man, his face full of pride. Friends who had helped them on their journey traveled to attend. As they exchanged their vows, the pocket watch rested on a velvet cushion, a symbol of the promise that brought them back together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton kissed his bride, and the room erupted in applause. The reception was a celebration of new beginnings. Josephine moved through the party on Clayton's arm, proudly introducing him to her business associates. "Are you ready to be a businessman, Mr. Zachary?" one of them teased. Clayton smiled, holding Josephine tight. "Sir, I am ready to be whatever she needs me to be." Later, they slipped away to the garden for a quiet moment. "Happy, Mrs. Zachary?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Completely," she answered, then got a mischievous look in her eye. "Though I do have one request for our future." "Anything," he promised. She grinned. "You have to teach me how to ride a horse properly." Clayton laughed, a deep, genuine laugh. "That, my love, I can definitely arrange. Let us just hope our future journeys are a lot less dangerous than our first." "With you by my side," she said softly, "I am ready for any adventure." 5 years later, on a crisp morning much like their wedding day, Clayton stood on the porch watching their 4-year-old son, Thomas, try to climb onto his first pony. Beside him, Josephine held their infant daughter, Emily, in her arms. "He has your determination," she observed with a proud smile. "And your stubbornness," Clayton added, wrapping an arm around his wife. The years had been kind. Clayton had taken to the role of a businessman, even starting a successful side business breeding and training horses. Josephine had continued to manage the family enterprises with great skill, earning respect across the region. Together they had built a life and a reputation for being fair and honest. Jane had also found her happiness, marrying a young lawyer and living just down the street with her husband and their twin boys, which kept the sisters as close as ever. As Thomas finally swung his leg over the pony's back, grinning with triumph, Clayton felt a familiar wave of gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" Josephine asked, noticing his far-off look. Just about how different things could have been if Harper had not sent that telegram. She leaned into him with quiet certainty. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." As their son completed a wobbly circle in the yard, Clayton thought that maybe she was right. Still, looking at his family, his brilliant wife, his adventurous son, and his baby daughter with her mother's eyes, Clayton was thankful for the exact path that had led him here. He had gone from a lone cowboy with a troubled past to a husband, a father, and a man people respected. He pressed a kiss to Josephine's temple. "I love you," he said simply. She leaned into him, her answer both familiar and precious. "And I love you, always." Just then, Thomas called for them to watch his new riding skills, and they turned together to applaud their son. It was one more perfect moment in the life they had built from the ashes of danger. The train that had once carried two frightened sisters into the unknown was now just a distant memory. They were on life's journey together now. The path ahead might be challenging at times, but it was full of promise, lit by a love that had been forged in fire and had proven to be unbreakable. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.